I hope you are enjoying this five greatest series. I keep chugging right along. You can check out the other videos that are a part of this playlist that'll be going on all throughout the month of June down in the description box down below. Today I'm here to talk about the Carolina Panthers, an expansion franchise in 1995 that has had some good years in its history. In their second season, they kind of went for it from the jump. They didn't want to struggle as an expansion franchise, similarly to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They went very all in on the old guys and the free agents, made it to an NFC championship game. Several years later, they made Super Bowl appearance and came this close to actually beating Tom Brady and the New England Patriots in the 2003 season. They've had a few other playoff appearances. Carolina's history isn't terrible. No Super Bowl championships, no Hall of Famers, at least at this particular moment, but, I'm sure the organization will accumulate more good history as the years go by. Now, in terms of the five greatest players in organization's history, yeah, this wasn't the greatest list. It wasn't the easiest list to assemble. It's not loaded with all-time great players or anything like that. Let's face it, the franchise is going into its 20th year of existence. As a result, is probably just not going to have as many great players as other teams like my Bears or the Green Bay Packers, or yes, even teams like the Cleveland Browns throughout their long and storied histories. When you look at the Carolina Panthers, though, they still had some very good players over the years. Some guys that deserve an honorable mention, but that weren't good enough ultimately to make my list of the five greatest Carolina Panthers of all time. I look at Sam Mills. I think somebody that actually should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But he was, an early leader on those Carolina Panthers defenses of the early or the mid 90s, excuse me. He was only there for a few seasons, but I think he had a tremendous impact on that Panthers organization. Player that I had a tremendous amount of respect for. Still sucks that he passed away like he did from cancer several years back, but I think he's somebody that will always be thought of very fondly by Carolina Panther fans. I look at Muhsin Muhammad. I look at, yes, even Jake Delhomme, somebody like D'Angelo Williams. These are some of the guys that, have had productive careers for the Carolina Panthers, did some good things for the Carolina Panthers, but ultimately weren't good enough to make the top five list. So let me get started then. The five greatest Carolina Panthers of all time. Again, it's going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it is solely based off of what they did during their time as a Carolina Panther, because what they did for another organization, let's say, is inconsequential to their impact, meaning significance and greatness in the history of Carolina's franchise. Number 5, Cam Newton, the number 1 overall pick in 2011 out of Auburn. A lot of you might be saying, how the hell is Cam Newton on this list after only 3 years? One, his organization is just now this year going into its 20th year of existence, or 20th season of existence, excuse me. Two, that means that there's not a lot of really truly great players in the history of this franchise. And three, let's face it, Cam Newton has had a big time impact on that franchise in his 3 seasons. A two-time Pro Bowler, the 2011 NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. You're looking at a quarterback that led his Panthers team to a division title and a home playoff game, a first round bye, a playoff appearance in the 2013 season. And I think, the sky is the limit for Cam Newton. I would envision and anticipate that someday, maybe 15, 20 years from now, we'll look back and say that Cam Newton will end up being the greatest player in the history of the Carolina Panthers. But 3 years into his career, you're talking about a quarterback that as a rookie threw for over 4,000 yards. That was incredibly impressive. A real dual threat quarterback that fits the mold of today's dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL that you're seeing more and more of starting throughout the league. Like I said, in 3 seasons, he's already been to the Pro Bowl twice, taken his team to the playoffs, won the division title. His resume, already to me surpasses Jake Delhomme, except for the fact that Jake Delhomme in his first season in Carolina in 2003 took the team to the Super Bowl. But let's not get carried away here. Cam Newton's level of skill and talent as a quarterback is much better and much different than Jake Delhomme's, needless to say. Number 4, Jordan Gross, the 8th overall selection out of Utah in the 2003 NFL draft. This was a guy that manned the tackle position for over a decade and did it very well. A bit of an underrated player, if you ask me. A 3-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time first-team All-Pro. He was a part of that 2003 NFC Championship Carolina Panthers teams. I think the organization is going to really feel the effects this year of a Jordan Gross retiring and no longer being there, manning the blind side to help protect Cam Newton in that Panthers offense. He served for several years as a great blindside protector for Jake Delhomme. Did the same thing again with Cam Newton, and I think yet again, while he wasn't at the level of maybe a Jonathan Ogden or a Walter Jones or to a lesser degree an Orlando Pace or some of the other top offensive tackles in the game today, Jordan Gross surely deserves some recognition for his contributions over 11 seasons to the Carolina Panthers. A great player in that organization's history. Number 3, something that's a little bit off the beaten path, but I think most Panther fans would agree with me, is Wesley Walls, a tight end that was acquired in 1996 that during his time in Carolina made 5 Pro Bowl appearances over the course of 7 seasons. This guy was really the star of those early Carolina Panthers offenses. He was really that go-to guy. He was the guy that you had to account for. I mean, he's not one of the all-time great tight ends. He'll never be a Hall of Fame tight end. But for the Carolina Panthers, this was a great all-around tight end that was a real reliable weapon in the short and intermediate area for a quarterback, let's say like a Kerry Collins. Wesley Walls, like I said, was one of those first real players that you identified the Carolina Panthers with. And in his 7 seasons in Carolina, he made it to 5 Pro Bowls. He was a really good player during that stretch of time for Carolina. Number 2, the last 2, both 2 and 1 are pretty easy. I guess it's just a matter of perspective and what order you put it in. Number 2 to me is Julius Peppers, a second-round pick in 2002 out of North Carolina, who during his 8 seasons in Carolina was easily one of the best at his position and put himself in a position where people by the end of his time in Carolina started to view him as a potential Pro Football Hall of Famer someday. A 5-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time first-team All-Pro. He was the 2002 NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. He was a consistent player for Carolina, too, with 6 seasons of 10 or more sacks. He was the kind of franchise piece for Carolina. He was that guy that really made the defense go. He was the guy that defense was built around in Carolina. That line for a time with guys like Chris Jenkins and Mike Rucker and Preston Buckner was one of the better defensive lines in the NFL. But what truly made that whole defense work, and in particular that defensive line work, was the great all-around play of a Julius Peppers. What always impressed me about Peppers during his Carolina time was this was a guy with monstrous size and freakish athleticism that you could do all types of things with, and he could do all types of things. He was a great pass rusher, both with speed and skill and great power and moves. He could also play the run very effectively, which you also often don't get out of defensive ends, even some great defensive ends. And he's a guy that in in the old zone blitz schemes, you could sit there and actually drop back. Yeah, I almost said Dom Capers, excuse me. But you could drop him back into coverage. He could actually sometimes defend tight ends and backs out of the backfield. A tremendous player, and truly one of the great Carolina Panthers of all time. Number 1, though, to me, is Steve Smith, the 74th overall selection out of Utah in the 2001 NFL Draft. Steve Smith, I think, surpassed Julius Peppers, and Steve Smith was really the emotional leader, the heart and soul of that Carolina Panthers team for so many years. And what puts a Steve Smith over a Julius Peppers in my mind is that Steve Smith, to me, not only was he a really damn good player, a 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time first-team All-Pro, 7 seasons with 1,000 or more receiving yards. This guy, to me, always had a propensity for showing up big when his team needed it. He had an ability to come through in the clutch and dominate in those big-time moments and those big-time games. You have lots of great players in the history of the NFL that had great performances, great statistics, but when the chips were all on the line, they kind of withered under the pressure and they kind of disappeared, and they didn't produce at a level you would expect. I think about somebody who should be in the Hall of Fame already, Tim Brown, a great player for so many years for the Oakland Raiders, but flat out, frankly, when a lot of times when the chips were on the line, he didn't really produce and he didn't play at a Tim Brown type of level. You didn't have to worry about that with the Steve Smith. Steve Smith, to me, was cash money. He was a big-time clutch player for that 2003 Super Bowl team, that 2005 team that made it to the NFC Championship game, the 2000, I think it was 8 team that made it to the NFC Championship game. Even this past year for the Carolina Panthers. You look at Steve Smith, and to me, He always had the ability, he did it far too often against my Chicago Bears, to be able to come through in the clutch and make the big time plays when his team needed him the most. Be that emotional spark plug and leader, that fiery guy that you could walk through walls with. And ultimately, that's why, to me, even more so than Julius Peppers, Steve Smith is the greatest player in the history of the Carolina Panthers. Let me know if you're a Panther fan down below what you think about my top 5 list. Let me know in general what you think of my top 5 list. Next up, can't wait to talk about this one. My Chicago Bears. Bears. With all the crap I give them, I will say this. It was very hard to do a top 5 list for that organization because no organization has more Pro Football Hall of Famers than them. So I can't wait to do that one. And then after that will be the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. And we just keep rolling right along from there.